All show and no talk is a fake master. All talk and no show is a fool. It is the man who talks while he performs that holds the crown.
In the iron grit of northern China during the Ming and Qing dynasties, a specialized craftsman was known as a Bashi, similar to a barker or showman, specifically referring to the guild of street showmen. This gritty street proverb was forged in the roaring, chaotic dust of Beijing's Tianqiao marketplace, barked by street showmen and martial artists fighting for eyeballs and copper coins. It was history's rawest marketing manifesto, a direct assault on the archaic, passive elite wisdom that claimed, "Good wine fears no deep alley." It was a lie. If the world doesn't know you are selling, you starve. More than 2,000 years before modern advertising was born, Han Fei, the cold-blooded architect of Chinese legalism, had already mapped this brutal market reality. In his masterwork, he told the dark parable of a wine merchant in the state of Song. The man's metrics were flawless. His measures were scrupulously fair. His customer service was impeccable. His wine was nectar, and his tavern banner flew higher than any rivals.
Yet no one bought. The barrels sat in the dark, rotting until the vintage turned to sour vinegar. Haunted by his financial ruin, the merchant begged a village elder for the answer. The elder looked at the tavern door and asked a single question. "Is your guard dog too fierce?" The merchant scoffed. "What does the ferocity of my hound have to do with the flavor of my wine?" "Everything," the elder replied. "People are terrified. When a father sends his young child with coins in hand and a jug in tow to purchase your vintage, your hound leaps from the shadows, snapping bones and drawing blood. That, merchant, is why your perfect wine rots in loneliness."
In the ruthless coliseum of modern commerce, this ancient curse remains absolute. Brand awareness is the final arbiter of life and death. You can harvest the finest raw materials, master the most impeccable craftsmanship, and brew the elixir of the gods. But if your supply chains cannot cut through the noise, if your narrative fails to penetrate the skin of the consumer, your mastery is meaningless. Your brilliant innovation will not bring fortune. It will merely become sour vinegar dumped into the gutters of history in absolute silence. Genius and relentless sweat are merely the table stakes. In the brutal mathematics of capitalism, true conquest requires a far more fickle deity: opportunity. Had Marco Polo simply died in that battle at Curzola, his mountains of golden memories would have rotted with his corpse. He needed the suffocating dark of a Genoa prison cell, and he needed the desperate quill of an Arthurian romance writer named Rustichello to unlock his destiny. The book they forged was the ultimate Bashi performance. It talked, it performed, and it forced the entire Western world to look east. They unleashed the ultimate advertisement for global capitalism. And as the horizon opens, we must ask, when the armies of the next empire cross the border, who will hold the wine? Who will unleash the hound? And who will capture the market? History tells us Marco Polo was chained at Curzola, but archivists argue over the exact map of his undoing. According to the 1334 Latin chronicle Chronicon Imaginis Mundi by Jacopo Dacchi, Polo's doom arrived 2 years earlier, in 1296, in a jagged, bloody skirmish between rival galleys off the Anatolian coast, trapped between Adana and the Gulf of Alexandretta. Whichever sea claimed his freedom, the result was the same. Polo was marched into the wet stone vaults of Genoa, and there, in the dark, the silver-tongued merchant began to perform. In the suffocating, soul-crushing boredom of medieval imprisonment, Swapping lies and bragging of past glories was the only currency that mattered. But while the other shackled men kept their minds locked within the familiar, cramped borders of Europe, Polo's words breached the edge of the known universe. He spoke of an empire that ran not on gold, but on worthless slips of bark and paper money. He whispered of magical black stones that burned longer and hotter than timber. He painted vistas of megacities so colossally wealthy that European capitals looked like mud huts. To the cellmates huddled around him, it was pure, unadulterated lunacy. They laughed in his face, mocking his grand design as the fevered rants of a broken man. They branded him with a cynical nickname that would echo through history: Il Milione, Mr. Marco Millions, the man who lied by the millions. The ultimate curse of genius is its absolute loneliness. When you fly too high, you fly alone. There are no wings to match your orbit. But in the dark of that Genoa prison, Marco Polo's catastrophic isolation came to an end. In the shadows sat Rustichello da Pisa, a captured weaver of romantic myths. Game recognized game, iron sharpened iron. What followed was the most explosive, perfect chemical reaction in the history of world literature and human adventure. The linguistic barrier between them was a yawning chasm. Polo spoke in the rough, sea-salted slang of the Venetian lagoons, a tongue as alien to Rustichello's elegant Old French as the ancient and aristocratic London playwright trying to decipher the ancient, guttural Gaelic of a Scottish Highland clansman in a smoke-filled tavern. Yet Rustichello possessed the lethal instincts of a master storyteller. He smelled the fire beneath Polo's chaotic words. He defied the linguistic noise and dipped his quill into the ink. But Polo knew that raw stories turn into sour wine without proof. He needed metrics. He needed facts. Through high-risk, clandestine prison channels, Polo smuggled a desperate letter out to his father in Venice. The gamble paid off. Piercing through the wartime front lines of two warring empires, a hidden cache of documents bled into that dark Genoa cell. Polo's original, dust-stained field journals and sacrosanct official administrative data from the imperial court of Kublai Khan. In that single, breathtaking moment, the manuscript evolved from a madman's fantasy into something far more dangerous: a hard-boiled corporate audit of the Orient. It was no longer just one man's memories wrapped in another man's poetic flair. It was armed to the teeth with cold, undeniable infrastructure data, meticulous population tallies, sovereign trade logistics, and absolute, devastatingly precise imperial taxation figures. A cosmic collision of fates was about to ignite. Inside that damp financial fortress of Genoa, a grotesque yet magnificent theater was born. Marco Polo would stand over his faded Venetian journals, shouting, pacing, and throwing his arms into the air, panting as he resurrected the golden palaces of his mind. Beside him in the candlelight sat Rustichello, tearing at his hair, desperately clutching at the alien syllables of the Venetian sea slang. Once he cracked the code, his feather pen would scratch violently against the dead parchment, bleeding out elegant lines of Old French. They called the monstrosity Il Milione, a name mocked by their peers. In French, it was catalogued as Livre des Merveilles du Monde, the Book of the Marvels of the World. But Rustichello was not a neutral stenographer. He was a dealer in myths. Unable to comprehend the sheer scale of the East, the Scribe did the only thing a romance writer could do. He hijacked Polo's metrics and wrapped them in the armor of King Arthur. Through Rustichello's fevered imagination, the globally transformative travelogue was baptized in the holy water of Western chivalry. Khan Balik, the colossal concrete seat of Mongol superpower, was repainted as Camelot. The terrifying, blood-soaked maneuvers of Kublai Khan's cavalry, the most lethal military machine on Earth, were sanitized, polished, and repackaged as romantic duels between European knights on horseback.
Emperors, kings, dukes, marquises, counts, knights, and all persons wishing to know the various generations of men in the world, also the kingdoms, provinces, and all the regions of the East, read this book. In it you will find very great and wonderful things of the nations, chiefly of Armenia, Persia and Tartary, India, and various other provinces. In the present work, Messer Marco Polo, a prudent and learned citizen of Venice, relates in order the various things which he himself saw, or heard from men of honour and truth. And those who read this book may be assured that all things in it are true. For I would have you to know that, from the creation of Adam to the present day, no pagan, or Saracen, or Christian, or any other person of whatever race or generation, explored so many parts of the world, or saw such great wonders, as this Messer Marco Polo. He, being in the year of our Lord 1295, shut up as a captive in the prisons of Genoa, thought with himself what a great evil it would be if the wonders seen and heard by him should not be known to those who could not view them with their own eyes. He therefore caused the accounts here contained to be written by Messer S., Rusticians of Pisa, who was confined with him in the same prison, in the year of our Lord 1298.
Inside the dead silence of that prison cell, the sparks of global destiny were blinding. Outside, the century-long apocalypse between the twin merchant empires had reached its brittle, dying gasp. Venice had been behaviorally castrated at the Battle of Corzola, its armada sent to the bottom of the sea. Yet its home lagoons remained an unassailable fortress of mud and stone. Genoa held the smoking crown of victory, but it was a crown made of dirt. 100 years of unrelenting naval crusades had caused a fatal fiscal hemorrhaging. Genoa was bankrupted by its own triumphs. Its vaults were hollow, leaving the Republic with zero material power to swallow or liquidate its crippled rival. Across the war-torn Apennine Peninsula, Milan sat quiet in the northern interior. Possessing no navies and no stakes in the saltwater monopolies, Milan was the perfect calculating neutral. Desperate to stop the bleeding, the shattered giants, Venice, the broken master of the Adriatic, and Genoa, the hollow victor of the West, turned to the inland lord, Matteo I Visconti. Visconti was the undisputed wolf of Milan, ruling as the captain of the people. But he carried a heavier iron. The Holy Roman Emperor had branded him the imperial vicar of Lombardy. He held the prestige both broken empires needed to save face. In May 1299, under Visconti's iron gavel, diplomatic envoys huddled in Milan to sign the Treaty of Milan. The ink on the parchment carried a singular, devastatingly simple decree. The slaughter ends. Every chain is broken. Every prisoner goes home. Genoa opened its iron cages. The human livestock of a 100-year corporate crusade spilled back into the sunlight. And in August 1299, the heavy oak doors of that financial fortress swung open for the last time. Marco Polo and Rustichello da Pisa walked out into the blinding light. When the iron doors finally flew open, the contagion escaped. The fire bred inside that Genoese dungeon went out to consume the earth. The travels of Marco Polo didn't just circulate, it acted as a psychological wildfire, sweeping across the West and driving merchants, explorers, and bankers mad with unadulterated greed. 2 centuries later, a desperate Genoese drifter named Christopher Columbus would sit in the candlelight, obsessively clawing through his personal copy of Polo's book, the very pages that survive today, heavily scarred by his frantic ink in the margins. Driven by this golden hallucination, Columbus bled the Spanish crown dry of patronage, unfurled his sails, and charged west into the abyss to hunt that legendary wealth. The age of sail was born in blood. Global capitalism broke its chains, and the oceans turned crimson. This brings us back to the ghost of Karl von Clausewitz. The Prussian general famously decreed that war is merely the continuation of politics by other means. But look at the ruined ledgers of Genoa, the corporate rise of Venice, and the prison cells that birthed the modern horizon. He was dead wrong. Politics is merely the civilized facade behind which capital operates. The state, the crown, and the sword do not command the battlefield. They are merely puppets dancing on the golden strings of the market. War is not a political instrument. War is the ultimate auditor of empire, the absolute ledger of a liquidating world. 15 years, 5,400 days of damp, subterranean twilight. From the blood-choked waves of Meloria in August 1284 to the flash of freedom in August 1299, the Genoese dungeons demanded 15 years of Rustichello's soul. In the brutal dawn of his captivity, his pen ran on illusions, breathing life into the phantom kings and round tables of King Arthur's mythos. But his collision with Marco Polo acted as a late-stage nuclear fission. It cracked open his imagination, forcing him to forge the Western world's very first hard-boiled, comprehensive chronicle of a living, breathing Eastern superpower. However, the miracle carried a lethal tax. The dead silence of the cells had secretly turned into a slow execution. The relentless labor of leaking another man's golden universe onto raw parchment had utterly burned away Rustichello's remaining vital spark. He didn't leave that financial fortress to enjoy his freedom. He walked out as a walking corpse. The archival ink on his own life dry up almost instantly. By the turn of 1300, his name vanishes from the historical record forever. Historians agree on his ultimate sentence. Around the dawn of 1300, just months after smelling the open air, the scribe died of absolute exhaustion. The man who gave Europe the map to the world's wealth died without a single coin to his name, leaving nothing behind but the eternal echo of his ink. While the scribe decomposed in an unmarked grave, the merchant drowned in gold. Back in Venice, the colossal dividends of Polo's 24-year Eastern venture bought him a life of untouchable opulence. His father and uncle erected a private monument to their greed, a sprawling palace complex in the San Giovanni Crisostomo district, christened by the locals as the Corte del Milion, the Court of Millions. In 1300, the exact year Rustichello's lungs drew their final breath in starvation, Marco Polo entered the halls of high society matrimony. He married Donata Badoer, the daughter of a patrician merchant elite, cementing his status within Venice's ruling capitalist class. Formally, they bred 3 daughters. But the ledger of history is never fully closed. In 2022, modern archival sleuths blew the dust off the Venetian state archives and uncovered a phantom. Hidden in a forgotten 1319 will was a 4th daughter, Agnese, born in secret before the chains of Genoa ever touched Polo's wrists. A ghost child from his years of reckless global transit. Polo ran his commercial empire until 1323, when his biological machinery finally broke down. In January 1324, the old warlord of trade died in his silk sheets. He left behind a fractured world, a book of romanticized maps, and an insatiable appetite for wealth that would soon tear the oceans apart. The Travels swept through medieval Europe like a virus, but it was a masterpiece adrift in a pre-Gutenberg world, copied entirely by hand upon animal skins. No authoritative Bible of his journey ever existed. That raw structural chaos, blended with Rustichello's chivalric bias, condemned the book to a purgatory of eternal skepticism. From that day to this, the critics roared hoax. They were blind to the math. In the arena of hard history, the empirical armor of Marco Polo completely weaponizes his text against the skeptics. Even when his pages cannibalized the campfire tales of other merchants, Polo's core infrastructure metrics are bulletproof, verified by the cold stone of archaeology. When he noted that the city of Zhenjiang was crawling with Nestorian Christian churches, the Western Academy scoffed, until modern scholars unearthed a 14th century Chinese administrative ledger, the Jishun Zhenjiangji, which recorded those exact altars. When he mapped the tragic, sweeping maritime voyage of Princess Kokochin, sent across the oceans to marry the Persian Ilkhanate Emperor Argun, he wasn't spinning fairy tales. The entire Odyssey is independently cross-examined and verified by both Persian royal annals and imperial Chinese court records. Most devastatingly, Polo held the macroeconomic keys to the Mongol Empire. His hyper-specific records of paper currency logistics, imperial salt monopolies, and fiscal revenue streams are so uniquely accurate that they exist nowhere else in the entire non-Chinese library of the world. They are datasets that could only be acquired by a man who stood inside the treasury, yet fully supported by Chinese domestic records compiled after his departure. But we are not here today to argue with the ghosts of dead academics. We are not here to rehash the old, exhausted debates over his ink. We are here for something far more lethal, the path he has walked on this land. It is the most legendary network of trade in human history. Yet, for thousands of years, the men who bled along its tracks didn't even know its name. The concept was born in 1877, coughed up from the massive 5-volume masterwork China by Baron Ferdinand Freiherr von Richthofen, a legendary German geographer who conducted 7 grueling, mud-soaked reconnaissance missions across the dying Qing Empire. He called it the Seidenstraßen, the Silk Roads. Decades later, Emmanuel Edouard Chavannes, the dark father of Western sinology and the first titan to ransack the buried memories of Dunhuang and Xinjiang, shattered the concept open. He realized this wasn't a single line cut through the sand, it was a dual-headed predator. Chavannes mapped the twin infrastructure of global transit, the Overland Silk Road and the Maritime Silk Road. These were the lungs through which ancient wealth breathed. And it was inside this exact colossal meat grinder that Marco Polo executed his ultimate geopolitical loop. He bled his way out along the punishing veins of the earth, and he sailed his way back through the warm, treacherous pulse of the sea. In the fractured mud of medieval Europe, travel was a death sentence. Every few miles, a new feudal tyrant waited to bleed your pockets dry, and every shadow hid a bandit's blade. But history loves a sudden, terrifying paradox. The moment you crossed eastward past Persia and stepped into the shadow of the Mongol Empire, the chaos stopped. The earth became frozen in absolute, totalitarian peace. To weaponize this peace for trade, the Khans created the ultimate global backstage pass, the paisa. Depending on the bearer's administrative privilege, these tablets were forged from gold, silver, bronze, or wood. Before Marco Polo ever packed a bag, his father Niccolo Polo and his uncle Maffeo Polo had already tested the lethal efficiency of this system. Around 1265, deep in the dust of Central Asia, they were intercepted by a Yuan dynasty envoy and hauled before the master of the world, Kublai Khan. The Khan saw these Venetian merchants not as prey, but as diplomatic tools. He wanted them to carry a message to the Pope in Rome. To ensure his human investments survived the journey home, Kublai slapped a golden paisa into their hands. That piece of gold was the medieval equivalent of an uninterceptable black card with a license to kill. With that golden tablet, the Polo brothers unlocked the Ortu, the YAM system, the most terrifyingly efficient, hyper-advanced logistical network the ancient world had ever seen. It was an imperial highway paved with fear. Every few miles, an oasis of state power waited. The moment the gold flashed, local governors defaulted into absolute servitude. They had to provide the finest food, the fastest fresh cavalry mounts, and if the road turned bloody, an entire army escort to shield the merchants. All of it free. All of it backed by the ultimate guarantee. If a local official hesitated for a single second, they were executed on the spot. The mathematics of empire were clear. The safety of the transit determined the velocity of the wealth. In the shadow of the Mongol sword, global trade detonated. This totalitarian peace was so unnatural, so terrifyingly absolute, that it staggered the contemporary world. Atamalik Juvayni, the brilliant 13th century Persian statesman who witnessed the Mongol expansion from the inside, wrote a line in his masterwork, The History of the World Conqueror, that became an immortal legend.
A maiden bearing a nugget of gold on her head could wander safely throughout the realm.
This wasn't romantic poetry. It was a cold data point. And decades later, it was verified by the greatest wanderer the earth had ever seen, Ibn Battuta. The Moroccan scholar sailed into the ports of the Yuan dynasty around 1345. Even as the empire's ultimate twilight began to fracture the horizon, the inertia of the Mongol security apparatus remained unbreakable. In his legendary chronicle, the Rihla, Battuta filed a report that confirmed Juvayni's wildest claim.
China is the safest and most agreeable country in the world for the traveler. You can travel all alone across the land for 9 months without fear, even if you are carrying much wealth.
Think about the sheer predatory scale of that reality. In a medieval world where crossing a county border meant risking your throat, the Khans had transformed thousands of miles of wilderness into a heavily guarded bank vault. They had unleashed the ultimate irony. The most savage conquerors in history had built the safest market on Earth. China's Silk Road did not emerge from peaceful handshakes. It was forged in the fire of the Han Dynasty's savage northern crusades that broke the spine of the Xiongnu. It breathed through the iron expansion of the Tang Dynasty's armies that pushed the frontiers into the deep west. And finally, under the apocalyptic western conquests of the Yuan Dynasty's Mongol machine, it became the ultimate, hyper-developed superhighway of east-west capital. This historical trajectory decisively proves that the state, even an imperial Leviathan, is not merely the passive protector of the market, but its active trailblazer. How can a free market ever manifest under a government incapable of guaranteeing the most fundamental human right, the right to life? How can commerce thrive within a state powerless to protect its citizens during travel? Ultimately, liberty is defined by the enforcement of rights. Whosoever secures those rights secures freedom itself. Freedom, when stripped of its romantic poetry, is nothing but the enforcement of rights. The romantic illusion of the invisible hand is a lie. The market is guided by a hand made of steel. Whosoever wields the violence to protect the right holds the keys to the liberty, and whosoever commands the liberty captures the wealth. Behind the most famous marketing slogan of free trade capitalism lies a ghost. In 1943, an American economist and government operative named Otto T. Mallory dipped his pen in the shadow of World War II and wrote a desperate plea for global survival.
If soldiers are not to cross international boundaries on missions of war, goods must cross them on missions of peace.
It was beautiful poetry, but poetry doesn't sell. By the mid-20th century, the marketing masterminds of the Foundation for Economic Education decided Mallory's warning needed more edge. They chopped it down, weaponized it, and forged the immortal internet meme of classical economics.
When goods don't cross borders, soldiers will.
Then, to give this synthetic brand maximum authority, they stripped Mallory's name from his own ink and stapled it to the corpse of the 19th century French titan, Claude Frédéric Bastiat. It was a brilliant slogan, but it was only half the truth. Today, we rip away the romantic nostalgia of the free market evangelists to crown this maxim with its final, darkest, and most historically bulletproof pearl. A truth forged not in the theories of think tanks, but in the ash and blood of empires.
When armies cross borders, goods cross frontiers.
We were raised on a beautifully toxic fairy tale. As libertarians and liberals, we were indoctrinated to worship a false god, the small government. We were promised that if we just dissolved the state, abolished taxation, and unlocked absolute unregulated autonomy, a free market paradise would descend upon the earth. Look past the textbooks and stare at the failure of raw reality. In my previous work, The Myth of Small Government, a Failed Utopia, I mapped the tragic existence of the Sama Bajau people. These stateless water nomads live the libertarian dream. No rulers, no tax codes, absolute isolation from the state. The result? They aren't living in paradise. They are rotting in a primitive utopia, trapped in a brutal, exhausting loop of baseline survival. They hold no real justice, and they possess zero economic efficiency. The free market has never been driven by the invisible hand of nature. It has always been pushed by the armored fist of giants. From the legionaries of ancient Rome to the warships of the British Empire and the carrier strike groups of Pax Americana, from the iron cavalry of the Han and Tang dynasties to the unstoppable world-spanning Mongol machine, the trajectory of the human race, from mud-bound clans to stellar civilizations, reveals a dark, undeniable mechanism. Freedom and wealth do not blossom in a vacuum. The state, that towering iron Leviathan, is the true engine of human progress. The Venetian dominance of the Eastern Mediterranean and the Genoese sovereignty over the West achieved merely localized, fragmented peace. This faded into absolute insignificance when measured against the colossal trade prosperity unleashed by the Roman Empire, which possessed the entire Mediterranean as its Mare Nostrum, its private inland sea. It was the British Empire that spearheaded the Industrial Revolution. It was the United States, acting as the global policeman, that engineered more than half a century of unprecedented global trade prosperity. Without security, how can there be liberty? Without regulation, how can there be commerce? Without the absolute protection of property rights, how can civilization ever evolve? This trajectory merely reinforces the eternal axiom crystallized by Rome millennia ago. The frontier of the market is defined precisely by where the empire's soldiers can march. The history of human civilization is a cold-blooded slaughterhouse, and the ledger of why the Leviathan survived while others turned to dust is devastatingly cruel. As we step onto the tracks of this Silk Road toward why nations succeed, we strip away the illusions to expose the ultimate raw truth of our world. The state is not the enemy of the market. The state is an organ of the market. The government is not the saboteur of commerce. It is its armored vanguard. Look through the ash of 5,000 years. All politics exist solely as the executive committee of wealth. All warfare is merely the ultimate liquidating showdown for economic supremacy. Through the brutal, unrelenting mathematics of human selection, only the mighty states, the iron leviathans, have been forged. The weak, the loose clans, the stateless dreamers have already been ground into microscopic dust, drowned forever in the deep, violent currents of history. Let the free market evangelists weep, but let them look at the law of survival.
The state is not liberty, but without the state, you do not just lose your freedom, you lose your throat.